Okay, so let's just continue our discussion. All right. So what we have learned in the first half of the today's class. So we have reviewed the aggregate demand and review the short-run aggregate supply. We review the short-run equilibrium and the long-run equilibrium, and then so we studied how the economy is going to respond to a demand shock. Okay, I want to emphasize the reason why we focus on demand shock is because based on the theory, also based on the available data, most of the trouble seems caused by demand shock. So that's why we look at demand shock in this class, right? And then so we have looked at what would happen if there's a positive demand shock or if there's a negative demand shock, how the economy is going to respond in the short run and in the long run. So you can see in either case, the economy is going to adjust, particularly through the labor market. And eventually we will restore the economy, right? So, and then, so the main conclusion from those analyses are the following. Number one, the economy can self-correct its problem. And then number two, so during this adjustment process, there could be a significant economic cost to our society. All right. So we have look at a few practice questions, right? And then so here, so this, so this one just ask you to use a graph to illustrate long-run economic growth in an economy, right? And here, so ask you to explain, assuming that aggregate demand doesn't change over time, right? And here, the key things is the long-run economic growth usually caused by increase in technology. So hence, you're going to see the short-run aggregate supply will shift to the right, and also the long-run aggregate supply will shift to the right. Okay, so I'm going to skip this part. Now we move to the last part of this class, this lecture. Hi. As I just explained to you, the economy is self-correcting in the long run. This just reflect the two cases we just studied, right? So if it was a negative demand shock, we are in a recession. And then over a long run, the wage will decline, right? Why the wage will decline is because high unemployment rate make the worker less selective or less picky in the labor market, right? So once the wage decline, then the aggregate supply will increase, okay? And eventually we will restore our economy, okay? So this is how the self-correcting works. But as I just also mentioned, okay, so this adjustment process can be lengthy and it can be painful. Most economists think it takes a decade or longer, okay? So if we look at Great Depression, it takes more than a decade for the economy to return the level of output before the Great Depression hit. Okay, so that's how most economists believe. So this adjustment process will be more than a decade. So if we lost our growth for 1 decade, this can be a disaster. Just remember, or just remind yourself, we have a rule of 70, right? So if in a decade we lost our economic growth, okay, even in a very modest growth rate of 2%, okay, in a decade, how much we are going to lose? We are going to lose probably like 30% of accumulated growth, right? So you can see, so this cost can be enormous. So that's just that just encourages us to think what we can do as economists, and furthermore, what kind of policy intervention we can have. Okay. So that gives rise to stabilization policy. This is the use of government policy to reduce the severity of recession. And on the other hand, we may want to control the excessively strong expansion. Okay. And so in either case, so maybe there's some policy can help so that we contain the volatility of the economy, right? And this stabilization policy was largely inspired or largely invented by John Maynard Keynes. He was considered as the founding father of modern macroeconomics, right? So now let's see how this stabilization policy can work. Okay. Oh, by the way, here just a quote. So we already seen that before, right? So in this famous quote, he said, "This long run is a misleading guide to current affairs. In the long run, we are all dead." Right? So what that means? Basically, he means, okay, so in the long run, yes, the economy is going to adjust itself. Like I just explained to you, most economists believe this adjustment process can be more than a decade, right? So when Keynes said in the long run we are all dead, doesn't mean we are going to die in 1 decade. It just says, okay, so if we just believe we are all going to die and we are going to take a hands-off stance to the economic recession, and so this is not useful. This is not responsible, right? So because these 10 years, as I just show you, so we are going to lose a lot, right? Lose the 10 years of growth. We are going to face high unemployment rate, right? As we seen when I explain to you when I explain the introduction of macroeconomics. Okay. Let's see. So, right. So yeah. So furthermore, let's just see. So whether those stabilization policy work or not. Okay? The way to see that is look at the unemployment rate over time. Okay. So the unemployment rate, look at here. So in 1929 to 1941. So this is during the Great Depression. So the unemployment rate was very high for an extended period, 10 years, right? So there are so many Americans suffering. Now, after that, so we have good economic policy because we have better understanding how the macroeconomy works, right? So largely thanks to John Maynard Keynes' contribution. So you can see, so the average unemployment rate is much lower, and we barely see this extreme unemployment episode, right? And then students may say, okay, so actually before the Great Depression, we were doing okay. So, but actually, so that's not 100% correct for 2 reasons. Number one, we don't have good data. And then number two, so prior to Great Depression, remember, so we just started the Industrial Revolution, right? And so most people actually works in agriculture economy. Okay, so then the different story. So now let's just back to the previous slides so that I can explain to you how the stabilization policy can work. Or the first thing is, what is the stabilization policy? Okay, let's see, so this is positive demand shock. Now let's use a negative demand shock as example. Okay. So now we have a negative demand shock. Again, just remind yourself what happened in 2020. Actually, we are still undergoing this great pandemic, right? And so we have a negative demand shock. So for now, it's largely caused by this virus, right? And then the government, for the sake of human life, or for the benefit of our health, and ask us to stay put. But actually, you should realize, even without the government restriction, most of us may still choose rationally to choose stay at home. Okay, so that's quite important. The government policy it just give you another incentive or some regulation, right? So the main point is, so given the outbreak of this pandemic, okay, so most of us, except so we have to go out, but most of us will voluntarily and rationally to choose social distancing. Okay, so these things you need to keep in mind. Now, given this negative demand shock, the economy is in a recessionary gap at E2, right? And as I just explained to you before the break, without the help of the government, and eventually we are going to see the economy is going to adjust here through the help of labor market adjustment, right? So now this is going to be very painful because so we are going to experience an extended recession period, as we saw in during Great Depression. Okay. Now you may wondering what we can do. So remember AD. Right? AD. There are four components: C plus I plus G plus NX. Right? So we have a demand shock. Okay, usually C decline, but certainly net export decline as well. Just imagine, so if we have this pandemic and then everybody else has a pandemic, they don't want to additional import. So meaning, so we are going to have a decline in net export. Investment also is going to decline, right? Because if your business is not operating in full capacity, what the hell will you want to expand, right? Okay, then we have only one thing left, okay, which is G, which is government spending. So now just imagine, so if somehow we can magically increase G, first of all, how would that affect the equilibrium here? Okay. So if G increase, and then so you're going to see this aggregate demand will be lift off, right? And then why this aggregate demand will be lift off is because so G is one of the big component inside this aggregate expenditure. Okay, so now if we spend more as a government, and then so we are going to leave this off, and then so instead of going to this route, so we are going to reverse this process. When I say reverse, essentially we just through government policy offset this negative demand shock, right? And so in that sense, the government is going to stabilize the recession. And then so you may wondering, so how comes the government can increase G in the short run? Right? And then just think about a few examples. One, the government can do some infrastructure, right? So for example, they can renovate the road, the highway system, okay? And number two, so they can invest in public health. Okay, think about the government spend in R&D for the development of vaccine or for the distribution of vaccine, right? And another way the government can do is, so maybe it's time for the government to invest in new technology, like renewable energy, right? Or maybe improve infrastructure for public health. Okay, so those are good examples. So the government spending can overcome or offset the negative demand shock. But actually, so maybe some students read the history book. So actually, so in the extreme case, what they can do is, so I'm going to dig a hole in the highway. And then first of all, we hire someone to dig a hole. And then so we hire someone to fill the hole. And then we repeatedly doing these things in the extreme case. Yes, this is going to have similar impact. But compared to other things I just explained to you, so first, this kind of wasteful. Okay, so because at the end, this government policy doesn't, besides just create some job temporarily, doesn't generate any goods to the society. Okay, so in that sense, wasteful. And furthermore, so this won't have long run impact to our economy. Think about compared to investment in public health, investment in new technology. So those spending will have long-lasting and a significant impact over our economy, can potentially boost our future economic growth, right? So that's the difference. But nevertheless, in either case, it will help to lift off the aggregate demand in the short run. But then, so how we are going to lift this off, or what kind of policy we are going to use? That's a different question. For now, so if you understand, so we increase government spending, even though in the extreme cases, some wasteful government spending can help in the short run. So that's priority. In the next chapter, we will see, so different policy is going to have different impact on our economy. All right. And so on the other hand, so if we have a positive demand shock, we are in the expansion, we are overheat, right? We are here. And then similarly, what we can do for the government is, so we're going to reduce G. So we are going to bring this back, right? Or you may think about, we can increase the tax so that everybody has less disposable income. So hence we can bring this back, right? So that we can avoid this route. Okay. So in either case, whether this is a positive demand shock or negative demand shock, okay, from this discussion, you can see there's room for government intervention, right? So the government intervention, actually, indeed, it can help us to stabilize our economy, right? So that is for the stabilization. Now let me see, so what else, right? It's here. Yeah, okay. So, but we have something quite challenging in reality, which is when we have a negative supply shock. Okay, I already gave you examples. Like last week, the Suez Canal was stopped. Or last year, so besides the negative demand shock, we also have a negative supply shock, just due to the disruption of supply chain, right? So this negative supply shock will be extremely challenging. Okay, so why is that? So let's just draw a diagram, just understand this very quickly. So if this is a negative supply shock, meaning, so we are here, right? So this is original. So let's call E1, this is E2, right? So this is aggregate demand. Okay. So if we want to stabilize output, because now we are in a recession. If we want to stabilize output, then so we are going to lift this up, right? But now if we lift this up, and then so we are going to make the inflation even worse, right? So you can see there's a dilemma. Okay, it's very challenging. But in terms of how we can address this issue, so this go beyond to this class, we may wait for more upper level class, right? Right. So yeah. By the way, just finish this part. On the other hand, if you want to bring the price down, and then the only way you can do is just reduce the aggregate demand. So you're going to make the recession, sorry, yeah, either way. So you're going to make the recession even worse, right? It's summarized by this here. But stabilized price requires reducing aggregate demand. This will deepen the output slump. Okay. All right. So let's see. I'm going to skip this part. So and then so we have finished these slides. Now we have 10 minutes left. So what we are going to do for the rest is I'm going to show you a video. So we have watched this video in the first. We have watched first half of this video. So this is a continuation of that video. The other things I want to say is, so Thursday we are going to have a review for our upcoming midterm 3. All right, so I'm going to send you the material either today or tomorrow. So and then so we will go through the review. Okay, so let's see.